Usually when you hear about an emergency, like a disaster or some massive trauma, you expect the people responding to it to be focused entirely on the victims.
Right. I mean, that's just human instinct. We look directly at the center of the tragedy to try and comprehend it.
Exactly. You expect them to be looking right at the faces of the people involved. But imagine a burned out first responder, someone who has just seen way, way too much.
Yeah, just totally overwhelmed.
Right. And instead of looking at the victims at a crash site, they just stare up at the sky. They focus on the color of the clouds or the weather, the landscape, just to avoid looking at the faces of the people left behind.
It's a really profound psychological defense mechanism, disassociation. It's a way to entirely detach when the reality of the pain in front of you is, well, it's simply too heavy for a single consciousness to process.
And that is exactly where we are starting today.
Welcome back to another deep dive. Today we have a really fascinating mission for you.
We really do. We are taking a stack of excerpts from Marcus Zusak's novel, The Book Thief, and we're exploring the extraordinary literal power of words. We're looking at how language can be weaponized for absolute destruction on a global scale.
And simultaneously, how it can be utilized for intimate, sheer survival.
Yes, exactly. We are going to examine the incredible duality of human nature in the most extreme circumstances imaginable. And I want to set the stage right up front. We are looking at a story set in 1940s Germany.
Right, meaning the backdrop involves the Nazi Party, the Fuhrer, the communists' extreme ideologies that shaped a catastrophic war.
Exactly. And we need to be very clear here. We're looking at these intensely dark historical ideologies, not to debate the politics of the era, but purely as the environment our characters are forced to navigate.
Absolutely.
We are objectively looking at how these factions function within the source material to see how ordinary people attempt to survive under the crush of radical extremes. We take no sides, we're just reporting what's in the text. Okay, let's unpack this.
Sounds good.
So we start with that burned out first responder I mentioned. But in this story, the narrator isn't a paramedic or a firefighter. The narrator is Death.
Right, and Death is utterly exhausted.
Just so exhausted.
The author completely subverts our expectation of the Grim Reaper here. I mean, Death isn't some malicious, cackling entity swinging a scythe around.
Yeah, no.
This is a working-class entity doing a grueling, impossible job during World War II, which was a time of unprecedented, unrelenting volume. Death tells us he desperately needs a vacation from what he calls the leftover humans.
The survivors.
Exactly, the survivors. The ones crumbling among the jigsaw puzzle of realization and despair. Those are the ones Death just can't bear to look at.
So, to cope with the sheer tragedy of those survivors, Death focuses on colors. He uses the colors of the sky as a distraction, like a way to look away. And he specifically details 3 colors tied to our protagonist, a young girl named Liesl Meminger. He sees her 3 times in the flesh. First, there's a blinding white snow. This is the day her little brother tragically dies on a train. Second, a signature black, which is the smoky charcoal of a crashed pilot's plane. And third, a soupy, blood-red sky after a devastating bombing raid.
Now, think about those 3 colors for a moment. White, black, and red.
Yeah.
If we pull back and look at the macro picture of 1940s Germany, those are the exact colors of the Nazi flag.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
The very backdrop of the entire era, the symbol of the regime causing all this immense suffering, is painted directly into the sky during Liesl's most traumatic, defining moments.
That is just a chilling visual. The regime is literally inescapable. It colors the very atmosphere of her grief. And, Death is drawn to Liesl because she is what he calls a perpetual survivor.
She really is.
It frames this entire deep dive around trauma and literal mechanisms people use to cope with it. Think about the last time you, the listener, were totally overwhelmed. You'd probably look for a distraction, right? Something to ground you. If Death uses the vastness of the sky to escape, Liesl is forced to find something earthly to anchor her. And she finds it in the most unlikely place, through thievery. But not stealing food or money? Stealing words.
Right, so she arrives on Himmel Street in the town of Mulching. And, fun fact, Himmel translates to heaven in German.
Which is pretty ironic.
It plays out as a very bleak, twisted joke because her arrival is anything but heavenly. She is completely traumatized. Her brother Werner was just buried in the snow. Her mother is gone.
Yeah.
And she is handed over to foster parents, Hans and Rosa Huberman, who are struggling just to stay above the poverty line.
And what a complex duo they are. I mean, Rosa is constantly swearing. She's abrasive. She beats Liesl with a wooden spoon, and she constantly constantly calls her a sawmensch, a filthy pig.
On the surface, it really sounds like pure abuse.
It does.
But the text nuances this in a really fascinating way. In this rough, impoverished, working-class environment, Sawmensch eventually morphs from a harsh slur into this twisted form of affection. Rosa takes in washing and ironing from the wealthy townspeople to keep her foster family from starving. So she is hardened by the world, but underneath that terrifying exterior, she is deeply committed to keeping this girl alive.
And then there's Hans, the quiet, gentle painter with silver, melting eyes. He rolls his own cigarettes, he plays the accordion, and he just sits patiently with Liesl through her relentless screaming night terrors every single night.
He's the ultimate comfort for her.
He is. But I want to go back to something that happens right before Liesl arrives at the Hubermans, back at her brother's burial in the snow. She commits her first theft. An apprentice gravedigger drops a black book with silver lettering. Liesl picks it up and steals it.
The Gravedigger's Handbook.
Exactly. Now hold on, let me stop you there, because that makes absolutely zero sense to me. Isn't it a bizarre, almost macabre coping mechanism for a traumatized child to obsess over a manual about burying people when her brother just died, especially when she can't even read a single letter of it?
I mean, it sounds totally bizarre until you strip away what the book says and look at what the book is.
Okay, what do you mean?
To Liesl, the content of those pages is irrelevant. She doesn't see a guide on grave digging. She sees the last physical link she has to her brother and her mother.
Oh, I see.
It is a tangible, heavy object that was physically present during the last moment her family was together on Earth. She can hold it in her hands. The words themselves don't matter yet. The object represents survival and memory.
It's her anchor. But then the words do start to matter, because Liesl wets the bed one night from a nightmare, and Hans discovers this dark little book hidden under her mattress.
Right.
And instead of shaming her or, taking it away, he uses it to teach her how to read.
Which is amazing because Hans is barely literate himself. But they start these secret midnight classes down in the basement. And because they are too poor to afford actual paper or proper school supplies, Hans uses what he has.
Painting supplies.
Exactly. He uses rough sandpaper from his painting supplies, and he paints letters on the basement walls.
He draws an A for Apfel and an S for Sawmensch, which I just love. It's so brilliant.
It perfectly encapsulates their life. But psychologically, what Liesl is doing down in that dark, cold basement is profound. She is systematically taking control of her chaotic, terrifying world. By learning the alphabet on rough sandpaper, she is reclaiming her agency. She was powerless to stop her brother's death or her mother's disappearance, but she can master these symbols, she can put them in order, she can make them make sense.
So, if death is disassociating, Liesl is building herself a foundation, letter by letter. But while she's down in that basement carefully piecing together the alphabet to build her mind, the outside world is using words to wage a massive, catastrophic war against the mind.
The contrast is huge.
It really is. The regime is using language to indoctrinate and destroy. Fast forward 463 days to April 1940. It's Hitler's birthday,
Right.
and the town of Mulching is throwing a massive celebration in the town square.
A celebration that centers around a massive bonfire. The townspeople are carefully piling up enemy propaganda, books, anything considered un-German or Jewish material, and incinerating it.
Imagine standing in your own town square, watching everything you know, thousands of pieces of literature and history being cheered on as they burn.
It's horrifying.
Liesl is standing there in her Hitler Youth uniform. She's watching this mountain of text turn to ash, and she hears a Nazi speaker on a podium screaming passionately, whipping the crowd into a frenzy, ranting about communists.
And that single word cuts through the noise of the crowd. Kommunistin. It's a moment of sudden, terrifying clarity for this young girl. She remembers hearing that word whispered in her past.
Yeah, all the pieces fall into place.
Suddenly, the puzzle pieces snap together. She realizes that the Führer, the man being celebrated with this fire, is the exact reason her parents are gone. Her father was a communist.
So the propaganda machine accidentally gives her the key to her own tragedy. And after the rally, she's sitting on the church steps with Hans, and the realization boils over.
Yeah.
She looks at her foster father and says, "I hate the Führer." And Hans Huberman, the gentle, accordion-playing, silver-eyed Hans, who sits with her through every nightmare, slaps her across the face. Hard. And then he forcefully makes her do a Heil Hitler salute in public.
It is arguably one of the most jarring moments in the narrative. We've only seen Hans be endlessly patient and tender.
Exactly. But when you really look at the psychology of parenting in a totalitarian state, It's terrifying. I look at that slap like a harsh, painful vaccine.
That's a good way to put it.
It's a sharp, immediate dose of intense physical pain, but is explicitly designed to protect her from a much deadlier disease. If she says, "I hate the Fuhrer" out loud, the state will execute them all. He has to physically hurt his child to teach her the absolute terror of the world they live in.
The paradox of survival under extreme authoritarianism. You have to abuse your child in public to keep them alive in private. Hans is searing into her brain the vital difference between private truths and public compliance. In the safety of their basement, they can learn to read and have their private beliefs. But the second they step onto Himmel Street, survival dictates absolute, unquestioning conformity.
And Eliza learns the lesson, but she doesn't lose her defiance. Here's where it gets really interesting. They are walking away from the bonfire, and Liesl notices 3 books that somehow survive the flames. They're glowing deep in the ash heap. She sneaks over, and while she thinks no one is looking, she reaches directly into the smoking rubble and steals a blue book called The Shoulder Shrug. It is literally smoldering.
Wow.
She shoves it under her shirt, and the heat of the book physically burns her ribs as they walk home.
Fire is such a brilliant dualistic element in this scene.
How so?
Well, the regime is using fire as a tool of erasure, right? Trying to permanently destroy these ideas. But that same fire provides the residual heat of the rescued book against Liesl's skin. The physical pain of the burn on her ribs is the literal price she pays for keeping those forbidden words alive.
It's her secret rebellion burning against her heart. And someone sees her do it. The mayor's wife, Ilsa Hermann, is watching from the shadows.
Right.
But before we get to the mayor's wife, Liesl's act of stealing a burning book sparks a wildly dangerous idea in Hans Huberman.
An idea that involves acquiring the ultimate book of the regime. Hans goes down to the local Nazi party office to ask about his party membership application, which he knows won't be approved.
Yeah, he's definitely not getting in.
But while he's in the office, acting the part of the concerned citizen, he trades his hard-earned cigarette rations for a used, worn copy of Hitler's Mein Kampf.
Now, Hans hates the regime. He doesn't buy the book to read it. He buys it as a prop, a tool to save a man named Max Vandenberg.
Right. Max is a young Jewish fist fighter hiding in a dark, freezing storage room in Stuttgart. He is starving to death. The narrative notes he's eating a stale carrot, and the room is so quiet he fears the Fuhrer himself can hear the crunch of his chewing.
That's so tense.
His friend Walter Kugler visits him and hands him the copy of Mein Kampf that Hans procured. Tucked inside the pages of this manifesto of hate is a fake identity card, a train ticket, a map, and a key to Hans Huberman's house in Mulching.
So what does this all mean? Max has to get on a public train, surrounded by Nazi soldiers and citizens, to travel to the Hubermans. He sits in his carriage, visibly and openly reading Mein Kampf. He's using the book as camouflage to look like a loyal, indoctrinated German citizen.
Exactly.
Think about the heaviest, most uncomfortable piece of information you've ever had to hold. Max is gripping a book that explicitly calls for his total extermination, and he has to pretend to be engrossed by it. Isn't this just the ultimate literary subversion? Using a manifesto of hate as a literal physical shield to save a persecuted man.
Absolutely. It highlights the core thesis of the entire story. Information, language, even a book like Mein Kampf is not inherently magic. Its power lies entirely in how human beings wield it. But to truly grasp the profound weight of this specific act, we have to pull the lens way back to World War I. Why on earth is Hans Huberman risking his own life, his wife's life, and Liesl's life to hide a Jewish stranger in his basement?
Because Max is the son of Erich Vandenberg.
Yes. Erich and Hans fought side by side in the muddy trenches of France during the First World War. One morning, a commanding officer asked their platoon a very strange question. Who has neat handwriting?
Which is usually a trick, right?
Right. Usually volunteering for something like that was a trap, resulting in horrible, degrading chore duty. Nobody moved. But Erich Vandenberg stepped forward and volunteered his friend Hans.
Oh, wow.
Because Hans was assigned to sit in a tent and write letters for the captain, he stayed behind while the rest of the platoon, including Erich, marched out into a horrific battle. None of them came back.
Wait, really? Just handwriting? So Erich saved Hans's life using the concept of words. The mere idea that Hans had neat handwriting kept him out of the fatal battle. And now, oh wow, decades later, Hans is literally using words, the pages of Mein Kampf, to repay that exact life-saving debt. to Eric's son.
It is a breathtaking, multi-generational thematic loop. Words save Hans from the trenches of World War I, and now Hans wields words to navigate Max through the terror of World War II.
That is just incredible.
It proves that even in an era defined by mass slaughter, the quiet, persistent loyalty between two friends can transcend decades and ideologies.
It's incredible. And, it brings us to a really jarring contrast in the story. While these massive life and death stakes are playing out on trains and in battlefields, daily life on Himmel Street continues. And Liesl is still just an 11-year-old girl.
She's just a kid.
She spends her days running around with her best friend, Rudy Steiner, a boy with bright lemon-colored hair who's in a state of permanent, gnawing starvation.
The inclusion of Rudy in the childhood antics is essential. It prevents the story from becoming a monolithic tragedy. It grounds the historical epic in the messy, confusing, and surprisingly joyful experiences of kids trying to just be kids in a severely deprived environment.
And Rudy is such a fantastic character. The text details this famous Jesse Owens incident. It's 1936, the Olympics are happening, and Rudy is so obsessed with the Black American athlete Jesse Owens winning 4 gold medals that he literally paints himself black with charcoal.
Right.
He goes down to the local dirt track and runs the 100 meters, imagining the roar of the crowd. His father finds him and has to physically drag him home, terrified.
You can imagine the absolute panic of a German father in 1936 watching his Aryan son publicly emulate a black man, completely defying the racial propaganda the state is aggressively pushing.
Exactly. His father is trying to explain the perilous, deadly politics of the Gestapo to a kid who just wanted to be the fastest man on earth. Rudy's idolization naturally subverts the state-sponsored racism because children don't innately see the propaganda.
They just don't see it.
Rudy doesn't see a racial hierarchy. He just sees athletic greatness. He sees a hero.
It's the sheer innocence of childhood clashing head-on with rigid, terrifying state ideology. But the overriding reality for these kids isn't politics, it's hunger.
They are starving. So they join a gang of kids, led by an older boy named Arthur Berg, to steal apples from local farmers.
Yeah.
And they get incredibly creative with it.
Very creative.
At one point, they realize a delivery boy named Otto Sturm rides his bicycle down a specific path every Friday, carrying a basket of food for the priests. So Liesl and Rudy carry buckets of water and pour them on the freezing road to create an invisible ice slick.
Oh, man.
Otto crashes his bike and the kids swoop in and steal the food.
It's a completely ruthless act of childhood mischief, but notice Arthur Berg's specific twisted moral code. After they eat the food, he demands they return the empty basket to the fence where Otto can find it.
So there are rules.
Right, they are operating as thieves, but they refuse to be entirely stripped of their empathy.
I look at it as a twisted version of normal childhood mischief. They aren't stealing for the thrill of rebellion, or because they're bad kids, they're stealing because of systemic starvation.
Absolutely.
Yet amidst all this hunger and fear, they still find immense, genuine joy in the smallest possible things. There's a scene where they find a single pfennig, a coin in the dirt.
Yeah.
They take it to Frau Giller, a staunch, terrifying Aryan shopkeeper who forces every customer to say Heil Hitler before she will even look at them. And they buy exactly 1 piece of mixed candy. Just 1.
And because they only have 1, they have to share it. The image of Liesl and Rudy sitting together, passing a rock-hard piece of candy back and forth, taking exactly 10 sucks each, so it's perfectly fair, is incredibly poignant.
Why does that tiny moment matter so much in a story about World War II? I mean, it's just candy.
Because it represents the stubborn human capacity to insist on living. They're surrounded by death, by bombings, by the disappearance of their families. But right there, on the curb, passing a piece of candy back and forth, they are insisting on friendship. They are insisting on normalcy and joy. They are refusing to let the backdrop of total war completely erase their childhood.
They are finding a sliver of light in the absolute dark. Which brings us back to you, listening to this deep dive. We consume words every single day. We scroll through thousands of them on our phones, we skim articles, we send texts, we casually forget them almost instantly.
We take them for granted.
We really do. But the book thief strips away that modern complacency and asks us to consider the literal physical weight of the information we carry. Words can be used to isolate us, to build regimes of terror, and to incite mass destruction. But they can also be the very tools that help us survive the darkest moments of our lives. They can be painted onto a cold basement wall that help a traumatized girl reclaim her mind, or they can be carried tightly onto a terrifying train ride to save a man's life.
Language is the ultimate neutral tool. The choices we make with the information we hold and the stories we choose to protect can change the trajectory of everything.
Which leaves me with one final thought for you to chew on. Remember how we mentioned the mayor's wife, Ilsa Herman?
Right? The one watching from the shadows?
We know she stood in the shadows and saw Liesel steal that smoldering book from the bonfire. She saw a young girl commit a crime against the state. Ilsa could have ended Liesel's life right there. She could have whispered a single word to the authorities.
But she doesn't.
She doesn't. Instead, weeks later, when Liesel comes to the mayor's house to deliver the laundry, Ilsa quietly opens the door, leads this impoverished little book thief down a hallway, and invites her into her own massive, beautiful, secret library.
It's beautiful.
She just lets the girl read. It leaves you wondering, in a society that violently demands absolute conformity, where the penalty for independent thought is death, how many people around you are silently harboring their own secret libraries of resistance, just waiting for the right person to share them with? Maybe the next time you feel overwhelmed and look up at the sky, whether it's red, white, or black, you'll remember that even when the world seems to be burning down, there is always someone, somewhere, willing to reach directly into the ashes to save the words.